Hey, welcome back. So, the title of this mini lecture is The Post 9/11 World. And we're going to talk about five things that you need to know about American history as a recent history, American history since about 2001. Now, there's a lot of aspects of this, and much of it might be considered current events. Let's dig into it. So, the first, drones. Drones. So, since 9/11, the United States has carried out a number of military actions both in Iraq and Afghanistan and all over the world, including actions in Pakistan, including actions in different nations in Africa, and questions about U.S. deployment in places like Ukraine and other areas, the Philippines and other areas as well. And one of the new things that has facilitated American military action in the last 20 years has basically been drones or unmanned vehicles, unmanned aircraft. And these kinds of things have really brought up the question of the nature of war, because drones typically aren't commanded from the area. They might be commanded from back in the U.S., and the question of the nature of combat and whether or not someone is under threat, civilian violence, right? These kinds of things, violence against civilians, all these kinds of things. So drones and drone strikes, that would be one thing. Secondly, the iPhone, right? The iPhone. One's trusty cell phone or smartphone would be another term. In the last 20 years has reshaped what we think about pop culture, has reshaped what we think about the role of information, the role of the individual, and the ability of the individual to affect change and to transform aspects of culture and what does culture look like. Third, Obamacare. All right, Obamacare. So in 2008, Barack Obama was elected president of the United States, and one of the first major policy agendas that the new administration got passed was something called the Affordable Care Act. Now, the idea was to be able to decrease the cost of health care nationally, to get rid of the issue of what was called pre-existing conditions, so that you didn't need to have healthcare commonly, constantly, that you wouldn't have to worry about your healthcare going up if you changed jobs, this kind of thing. And there's, of course, it's still to this day an incredibly controversial, legislative thing. But the Affordable Care Act, or what was referred to as Obamacare. All right, number four, the Me Too movement. Now, the sad reality, of course, being that violence against, particularly sexual violence, against women, regardless of race, age, and has existed across time. In the last couple of years, women have begun speaking up and being heard more, talking about the nature of violence against them by men, typically in positions of power, of great power. So the court case against someone like Harvey Weinstein or Bill Cosby would be good examples of this. But of course, one does not, it doesn't have to be an issue of great power. It can be other issues of power. The dynamics there, they vary. But the Me Too movement has attempted to ask American society to confront the commonality of sexual violence against women, the long-standing commonality of sexual violence, and to work to combat it. All right, number five, Black Lives Matter. Whether or not you are someone who is particularly political, certainly over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, issues of race have become a part of the American story in different ways. So an example of this would be the Black Lives Matter movement that has risen up in the last few years. So after the killing of a number of young, typically African-American men, by police forces in and around St. Louis and Cleveland and New York, individuals like Trayvon Martin and Eric Garner, you saw the rise of a political movement that called itself the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, You also saw individuals like Colin Kaepernick, who brought prominence to this in the NFL. And generally, what these groups, they're not typically always, sort of. The coordination varies, and the idea with this particular movement was to try to highlight, or is, to try to highlight the nature of racial injustice and to see what can be done about racial injustice and maybe, the racialized nature of institutional cultures and this kind of thing. So, the Black Lives Matter movement, whether you're for it or against it, right, has resulted in a number of other counter movements, the Blue Lives Matter movement, this kind of thing. And it really kind of demonstrates the nature with which Americans are trying to have their voices heard in a new era. All right. Thanks so much.